If she was free, why did nobody want her? The little boy's question drifted through the crowded bazaar like a pebble tossed into still water. No one answered him. No one even slowed down. The rain had started an hour ago, a cold chemical drizzle that hissed softly against metal roofs and neon signs. Streams of pale blue water ran through the gutters between market stalls, carrying scraps of packaging, wilted food wrappers, and the reflections of 1,000 glowing advertisements. Merchants shouted over one another in a dozen languages. Cargo lifters groaned beneath heavy loads. Somewhere in the distance, a shuttle engine roared to life. Life moved forward. Business continued. Nobody stopped. At the main entrance of the Grand Carthos Bazaar, beneath a flickering sign advertising imported starfruit, a young alien woman sat quietly against a steel support pillar. A rusted restraint encircled one wrist, connecting her to a short chain bolted into the ground. Her silver hair hung damp against her shoulders. Rainwater dripped from the ends in steady drops. Her pale blue skin carried the faint shimmer common to her species, though dirt and neglect had dulled it considerably. In front of her stood a simple metal placard. 3 words had been painted across it in black industrial lettering. Free, just take her. Thousands of people passed the sign every day. Some stared. Some laughed. Some avoided looking at her altogether. A few snapped pictures before moving on. Nobody stopped. The girl no longer watched them. She had learned that lesson days ago. Hope was exhausting. Ethan Carter entered the bazaar through the Eastern Transit Gate carrying a weathered equipment case in one hand. At 37 years old, the human engineer looked exactly like someone who spent more time inside cargo vessels than luxury hotels. His brown jacket showed signs of years of repairs. His boots were scuffed. His face carried permanent traces of sleepless nights and long shifts. He had arrived on Carthos Station that morning searching for a replacement power regulator for his transport ship. The trip was supposed to take 20 minutes. Buy the part. Return to the docking ring. Leave. Before sunset. Simple plans rarely stayed simple in the outer systems. Ethan was checking prices on his datapad when he noticed people staring toward the entrance. Not stopping. Just staring. Curious, but unwilling to get involved. He followed their gaze. The first thing he saw was the sign. The second thing he saw was the girl. He slowed, then stopped completely. Around him, pedestrians continued flowing like water around a stone in a river. An elderly merchant brushed past his shoulder. 2 delivery workers stepped around him without looking up. Nobody cared that he had stopped. Nobody cared about her either. Ethan looked back at the sign. Free, just take her. Something about the words felt wrong. Not strange. Wrong. As if whoever had written them wanted to erase a person and replace her with an object. The alien girl kept her eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't acknowledge him. She didn't ask for help. She didn't beg. The silence around her felt heavier than the noise filling the market. Ethan stood there for several seconds. Long enough to miss 3 sales announcements and 1 incoming message from his ship. Long enough to notice details others ignored. The bruised exhaustion beneath her eyes. The way she held herself perfectly still despite the cold rain. The fact that she never once looked toward anyone passing by. Like someone who had already decided disappointment was easier than hope. Then, for the first time, she lifted her gaze. Her violet eyes met his. There was no fear in them. No anger either. Only a tired certainty that he would leave just like everyone else. Ethan glanced at the sign one more time, then back at her, and without fully understanding why, he set his equipment case down beside his boots and stayed exactly where he was. The rain continued to tap against the metal awnings overhead, creating a steady rhythm beneath the noise of the marketplace. Ethan rested one hand on the handle of his equipment case and studied the young woman for a moment longer. Most people would have kept walking. He knew that. In truth, he probably should have done the same. He had a ship waiting at docking ring 12. He had repairs to finish. Deadlines to meet. Fuel costs to worry about. None of those responsibilities changed the uncomfortable feeling settling in his chest. He glanced around the bazaar. Not a single person seemed surprised by what they were seeing. That bothered him more than the sign itself. Indifference always did. Finally, he cleared his throat. Do you know how long you have been sitting here? The alien woman blinked as if she had not expected him to speak. Her violet eyes narrowed slightly. Long enough. Her voice was soft but steady. Ethan noticed something immediately. She spoke standard galactic with almost no accent. Educated. Controlled. Not what he expected. That is not really an answer. Then perhaps you asked the wrong question. Ethan almost smiled. There was still some fight left in her after all. Before he could reply, a rough voice interrupted from a nearby stall. Human. Ethan turned toward a stocky merchant arranging crates beneath a glowing canopy. The merchant shook his head. Do yourself a favor and keep moving. Ethan walked a few steps closer. What is her story? The merchant laughed. Everybody asks that. Nobody likes the answer. Try me. The merchant glanced toward the girl before lowering his voice. She showed up 6 days ago. Different people brought her. Paid the market authority. Left her there. Left her. Exactly. Ethan frowned. Why? Nobody knows. Nobody asked. People asked. The merchant shrugged. People got answers that made no sense. Ethan looked back toward the girl. She had lowered her gaze again. Rainwater continued running down the chain connected to her wrist. And nobody helped? The merchant stared at him as if the question itself were strange. Helped with what? Ethan did not answer. The merchant sighed heavily. Listen, human. Outer Rim stations survive because people learn when not to get involved. Everybody here has problems already. That does not answer my question. Maybe because there is no answer. The merchant returned to his crates. Conversation over. Ethan stood there for another few seconds. Then he walked back toward the entrance. The girl heard his footsteps approach and immediately stiffened. You should leave, she said quietly. Why? Because everyone else eventually does. That is not much of a reason. It should be. Ethan crouched slightly, so they were closer to eye level. Do you have a name? Her expression hardened. Names belong to people. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Ethan looked at the chain, then at the sign, then back at her face. For the first time, he noticed something hid. The market authority office sat directly across from the bazaar entrance, wedged between a currency exchange kiosk and a warehouse selling agricultural equipment. Its gray exterior looked forgotten compared to the bright neon signs surrounding it. Rain streaked down the narrow windows. Inside, the air smelled faintly of recycled ventilation and old paperwork. Ethan pushed through the door and stepped into a small reception area illuminated by pale overhead lights. Behind a reinforced counter sat a bored clerk with dark green skin and four thin arms. The clerk barely glanced up from his terminal. Registration, licensing, or dispute resolution? He asked. Information, Ethan replied. That is not a department. Then point me toward whoever handles the situation outside. The clerk finally looked up. His expression changed immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. The girl? Ethan nodded. The clerk sighed heavily. You are the third person this week. And the first two left disappointed. Ethan leaned one elbow against the counter. Try me. The clerk tapped a few commands into his terminal. A document appeared on the screen. He studied it for a moment before shaking his head. Nothing illegal is happening. A person is chained outside your building. Technically, she consented. Ethan stared at him. Technically, the documentation is valid. Who filed it? Record sealed. Convenient. The clerk shrugged. Outer Rim regulations allow voluntary custodial transfer agreements. That sounds like a fancy way to avoid answering the question. The clerk seemed too tired to argue. Listen, human. You are not the first person to feel uncomfortable. But all the paperwork checks out. Nobody is forcing her to stay. Ethan frowned. Then why does she not leave? For the first time, the clerk hesitated. That, he admitted quietly, is the part nobody understands. Ethan looked through the rain-streaked window toward the bazaar entrance. From here, he could still see her sitting beside the pillar. Alone. Motionless. What happens if nobody takes her? The clerk turned his monitor slightly. At station closing tomorrow, her agreement expires. And then, she gets transferred. Transferred where? A labor processing facility. Ethan did not. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. The noise of the bazaar seemed to fade into the background. Vendors called out prices. Cargo drones floated overhead carrying sealed containers. Somewhere a transit bell announced the arrival of an evening shuttle. Yet none of it seemed to reach her. Ethan could almost see the conflict behind her eyes. People had ignored her, mocked her, avoided her, but very few had spoken to her, as if she were simply another person sitting in the rain. You should stop doing that, she said quietly. Doing what? Looking at me like I matter. Ethan frowned. That is an odd thing to complain about. She looked away first. It is dangerous. Before Ethan could respond, a A loud metallic chime echoed across the market square. A digital display above the entrance suddenly changed. Several merchants glanced toward it before returning to their work. Ethan followed their gaze. A public notice had appeared across the screen. Custodial transfer status. 26 hours remaining. He did not like the sound of that. 26 hours, he said. Until what? Until none of this is your problem anymore, she replied. Ethan folded his arms. You keep saying things like that. Because they are true. No, they are convenient. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You think you understand this situation? I think somebody wants me to stop asking questions. A faint expression crossed her face. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had accidentally stepped closer to the truth than he realized. Ethan noticed it immediately. There it is. What? That look. She remained silent. You know something. Everybody knows something. Not like this. The wind shifted, carrying cool mist. Through the entrance, the girl pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Ethan glanced toward a nearby food vendor. Steam rose from heated containers beneath a canopy. The smell of roasted vegetables and fresh bread drifted through the air. Have you eaten today? He asked. She looked confused by the sudden change in subject. What? Food. I know what food is. Good. Have you eaten? She hesitated. That was answer enough. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a few credits. Wait here. This time she almost laughed. Where exactly do you think I am going? Ethan shook his head and headed toward the vendor. A few minutes later, he returned carrying 2 insulated containers and a bottle of purified water. He handed one container toward her. She did not take it. What is this? Dinner. Why? Ethan sat down on the edge of a nearby cargo crate. Rainwater dripped from the metal roof above them. Because you are hungry. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. She continued staring at the container. Eventually, she accepted it with slow, cautious movements. Like someone handling a fragile object. Ethan opened his own meal and began eating without another word. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. After nearly a minute, she carefully opened the container. Warm steam escaped into the cool evening air. Her eyes widened slightly. This is from Harrow's kitchen. Ethan nodded. Apparently. It is expensive. Then I hope it tastes expensive. To his surprise, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. The smallest smile. Gone almost instantly. Yet it changed something. The distance between them no longer felt quite as large. She took a bite. Then another. Ethan pretended not to notice how quickly the food disappeared. Across the market, several people slowed to watch. Some looked confused. Others simply curious. Nobody interfered. Nobody approached. For the first time since Ethan had arrived, the girl seemed less like a display sitting beside the entrance and more like a person sharing a meal during a rainy evening. As darkness settled over the station and the neon lights brightened against the wet pavement, Ethan found himself wondering a question that nobody else appeared interested in asking. If everyone wanted to get rid of her, why had they gone to such lengths to keep her here? The evening crowd gradually thinned as station lights shifted into their nighttime cycle. Bright advertisements softened into cooler colors. Security drones floated overhead on quiet patrol routes. Rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement coated in reflections that made the entire bazaar appear suspended between reality and a dream. Ethan finished the last of his meal and set the empty container aside. The girl had already finished hers. She held the water bottle loosely in both hands, staring at the ground as if trying to solve a puzzle nobody else could see. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Strangely, the silence felt comfortable. Eventually, she broke it. You should not keep doing this. Ethan glanced toward her. Doing what? Being kind. He laughed softly. That might be the first time anyone has ever criticized me for that. I am serious. So am I. She shook her head. You think kindness costs nothing because you have never seen the bill arrive afterward. Ethan leaned back slightly against the cargo crate. That sounds like experience talking. It is. Her voice carried a quiet certainty that immediately caught his attention. Not bitterness. Not anger. Just exhaustion. The kind that came from disappointment repeated too many times. Ethan studied her for a moment. You still have not told me your name. And you still keep asking. Fair point. Another brief silence settled between them. Then something unexpected happened. She reached toward the water bottle, turning it slowly between her fingers. My mother used to collect old books, she said suddenly. Ethan blinked. That is random. Not really. Her eyes remained fixed on the bottle. She said people reveal themselves through small choices. And most people reveal themselves quickly. Ethan smiled. What do I reveal? For the first time she looked directly at him. That is the problem. Why? Because I cannot figure you out. Ethan chuckled. Trust me, there is not much to figure out. You stopped. Yes. You asked questions. Also yes. You bought dinner. Ethan nodded. I did. She tilted her head slightly. Nobody does all that without wanting something. The statement hung in the air between them. Ethan thought about it carefully before answering. Maybe where I come from, we do. Her expression suggested she did not believe him. Before either could continue, a sudden notification tone echoed from Ethan's wrist communicator. He glanced down. A message from docking ring 12. Ship storage fees begin in 4 hours. Ethan sighed. Perfect. Problem? She asked. My ship is reminding me that existing is expensive. To his surprise, she laughed. It was not loud, barely more than a brief breath of amusement. Yet the sound seemed foreign even to her. She looked genuinely startled afterward, as if she had forgotten she could still laugh. Ethan noticed. So did she. Their eyes met briefly. Then she looked away. A strange feeling settled over him. Earlier that day, she had seemed almost invisible to the station. Now she felt increasingly impossible to ignore. A cool breeze swept through the entrance. Her jacket shifted slightly. For the briefest moment, Ethan caught sight of the symbol hidden beneath the collar near her neck. The same mark he had noticed before. This time he saw enough to recognize its shape. Not a serial number. Not a labor registry seal. It looked older than that. Formal. Deliberate. Important. Before he could study it further, she quickly adjusted the fabric again. What was that? He asked. Her entire posture changed instantly. The warmth vanished. The walls returned. Nothing. Ethan frowned. That did not look like nothing. Then stop looking. Her voice was calm, but firm. Ethan raised both hands slightly. Okay. Yet as the station settled deeper into the night and the crowds continued fading away, one thought refused to leave him. Whatever secret she was hiding, it was important enough that even mentioning it had frightened her more than being left alone beside a chain. Hours passed. The station clock above the transit corridor rolled past midnight. Most of the bazaar had gone quiet. Metal shutters covered storefronts. Cleaning drones moved through empty walkways, their soft blue lights sweeping across the wet pavement. The endless noise that had filled the market all day had faded into distant echoes. Ethan remained seated on the cargo crate. He had no logical reason to still be there. His ship needed repairs. His account balance certainly did not benefit from missed work. Yet every time he considered leaving, he found himself looking toward the young woman beside the pillar. She seemed different at night. Less guarded. Less like someone bracing for another disappointment. At some point she had fallen asleep, sitting upright against the support beam. Exhaustion had finally won. Ethan noticed immediately. Even asleep, one of her hands remained loosely wrapped around the chain attached to her wrist, as if she expected someone to take it away. The sight bothered him more than he expected. He stood quietly and walked toward a nearby vendor stall that had already closed for the evening. A folded thermal blanket sat forgotten inside a storage bin marked clearance inventory. After leaving several credits in the payment slot, he carried it back. He draped it carefully across her shoulders. The movement was gentle enough that she did not wake. Ethan returned to the crate. 20 minutes later, she opened her eyes anyway. For several seconds, she looked confused. Then she noticed the blanket. Her gaze shifted toward Ethan. You bought this? She asked softly. Ethan shrugged. The station gets cold at night. She looked down at the fabric. You should not waste money on me. I bought dinner too. That was different. How? She did not answer. The silence itself became an answer. Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking again. You know what I think? That sounds dangerous. I think somebody spent a lot of effort convincing you that you are not worth helping. Her expression froze. The station lights reflected in her violet eyes. You do not know anything about me. Maybe not. Ethan nodded toward the blanket. But normal people do not apologize when someone gives them a blanket. She looked away immediately. The words had landed somewhere deeper than either of them expected. Several minutes passed before she spoke again. My name is Lyra. Ethan blinked. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. Lyra. She nodded once. That is my name. Ethan smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not the smile of someone who had won an argument. Just simple relief. Nice to meet you, Lyra. Something strange crossed her face. A mixture of sadness and gratitude. You were the first person to say that in a very long time. Ethan did not know how to respond, so he did not try. Sometimes silence worked better. Lyra looked toward the darkened station ceiling far above them. You asked earlier why I did not leave. Ethan nodded. I remember. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the blanket. The truth is that I cannot. Ethan frowned. Because of the agreement? No, then why? For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, very slowly, she pulled back the collar of her jacket. Just enough for him to see the symbol hidden beneath. Under the station lights, the mark became visible for the first time. A silver emblem burned into her skin. Elegant. Ancient. Official. Ethan immediately understood why it had seemed familiar. He had seen variations of the symbol before in history archives and diplomatic broadcasts. It belonged to one of the oldest ruling families in the sector. His eyes widened slightly. Lyra noticed. Now you understand, she whispered. The chain is not what keeps me here. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. The station seemed impossibly quiet. Even the cleaning drones felt distant now. His eyes remained fixed on the silver emblem beneath Lyra's collar. He had seen that crest before. News broadcasts, historical documentaries, diplomatic reports. The House of Voss was one of the oldest ruling families in the sector. Wealthy, influential, untouchable, or at least that was what everyone believed. You are kidding, Ethan finally said. Lyra gave a small, humorless smile. I wish I was. Ethan leaned back against the crate and rubbed a hand across his face. You are telling me that one of the most powerful families in known space left you chained outside a market? Not officially. That is not exactly reassuring. Lyra lowered her collar again, hiding the mark from view. Officially, I no longer exist. The words settled heavily between them. Ethan frowned. That is impossible. It should be. She stared toward the empty walkways stretching beyond the bazaar entrance. My family removed my records. My titles. My access codes. My identification. Every legal system connected to the sector now lists me as unclaimed. Why? Lyra was silent for so long that Ethan thought she might refuse to answer. Finally she spoke. Because somebody needed me gone. Ethan studied her face. That is not the whole story. No. Are you going to tell me the whole story? She shook her head slowly. Not tonight. Surprisingly, Ethan accepted that answer. Trust was not something built in a single conversation. They both seemed to understand that. A soft vibration suddenly rolled through the station floor. Ethan felt it through the soles of his boots. Seconds later, a deep mechanical hum echoed from somewhere beyond the docking ring. Lyra immediately stiffened. Her eyes moved toward the station skylights high above. What is wrong? Ethan asked. Nothing. That looked like something. Lyra remained focused on the ceiling. A ship just arrived. This is a space station. Ships arrive every hour. Not that kind. Ethan followed her gaze. Through the transparent panels far overhead, several distant lights were descending toward the station. Larger than cargo transports. Faster than commercial vessels. Organized. Purposeful. Even from this distance, they carried an unmistakable sense of authority. Lyra's hands tightened around the blanket Ethan had given her. They found me sooner than I expected. Ethan looked back at her. Who found you? She swallowed once before answering. People who are not interested in bringing me home. The words sent a chill through him despite the climate-controlled air. A notification alarm suddenly sounded from multiple public terminals across the bazaar. Screens flickered to life one after another. Market schedules disappeared. Advertisements vanished. New messages replaced them. Station security notice. Diplomatic vessels have entered local space. Cooperate with all authorized. Inspections. Ethan read the message twice, then looked at Lyra. Her face had gone pale beneath the blue tint of her skin. Lyra. She did not answer. Lyra, look at me. Slowly her eyes met his. For the first time since he had met her, he saw genuine fear. Not fear for herself. Fear of something inevitable. Something she had been expecting for days. Ethan glanced at the countdown display still hanging above the entrance. 21 hours remained before her transfer agreement expired. Yet somehow he knew that deadline no longer mattered. Whatever was happening had already begun. Across the station, distant engines continued rumbling through the darkness. And for the first time, Ethan realized the chain beside Lyra might never have been intended to keep her from leaving. It might have been placed there to ensure she could be found. The distant engine noise lingered through the station like approaching thunder. Ethan remained standing beside Lyra while activity around the bazaar slowly increased despite the late hour. Security personnel moved through the corridors more frequently now. Merchants who had already closed their shops began peeking through shutters. Rumors traveled faster than any ship. Something unusual had arrived, and everyone could feel it. Lyra stared toward the ceiling panels long after the announcement ended. Ethan noticed the way her shoulders had tensed beneath the blanket. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "You deserve to know," she replied. That would be a nice change. For the first time that night, she almost smiled. Then the expression disappeared. "My full name is Lyra Voss." Ethan nodded slowly. Hearing the name spoken aloud somehow made everything more real. "The House of Voss has ruled parts of this sector for nearly 400 years, she continued. "People think power makes families strong." Her eyes drifted toward the glowing market lights. "Sometimes it just makes them afraid." Ethan listened without interrupting. 3 years ago, my father died unexpectedly. After that, alliances changed. People who smiled at each other during ceremonies stopped trusting one another behind closed doors. "Politics," Ethan said. "Politics," Lyra agreed. I became inconvenient. The words sounded painfully simple. "You?" Ethan asked. "Why?" Lyra lowered her gaze. "Because I asked questions." Ethan blinked. "That is it. That is enough." A cleaning drone passed nearby, its soft motors humming against the quiet station air. Lyra watched it disappear before continuing. Money vanishes. Records change. Contracts appear. Entire colonies lose resources while a handful of people become wealthier. She shook her head. "I wanted answers." The wrong people noticed. Ethan exhaled slowly. The story sounded less like a royal scandal and more like something that happened everywhere. Different stars. Same mistakes. "So they erased you." "Officially, yes." "And unofficially?" Lyra looked directly at him. "Unofficially, they needed me where everyone could see me." Ethan frowned. Then understanding hit him. "The market." She nodded. "Nobody hides something by putting it in a dark room. They hide it in plain sight." The realization settled heavily between them. Thousands of people had passed her every day. Nobody had looked closely enough to recognize who she was. Nobody except one stubborn engineer who had missed his work schedule because he could not ignore a sign beside a chain. Suddenly another announcement echoed through the station. "Arriving diplomatic delegation requests access to Commercial District 7. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a look. Commercial District 7. The bazaar. "They are coming here," Ethan said. "Yes." "Do they know exactly where you are?" Lyra hesitated. "I do not know." That answer worried him more than certainty would have. A group of station officials hurried across the far end of the square. Their nervous expressions told their own story. Whatever delegation had arrived carried influence, the kind that opened doors before anyone knocked. Lyra slowly stood for the first time since Ethan had met her. The chain rattled softly against the pavement. She was taller than he expected, proud despite everything. For a moment, Ethan caught a glimpse of who she must have been before this station, before the sign, before the chain. Not a victim, not a discarded person, someone accustomed to carrying responsibility, someone who had simply been abandoned by those who should have protected her. "Ethan," she said quietly, "if they ask questions, you should walk away." He looked at her. "You already know I am not going to do that." A mixture of gratitude and concern crossed her face. Then, beyond the entrance, a row of bright white lights appeared at the far end of the corridor. Someone important had finally arrived. The white lights advanced through the corridor until the entire entrance of the bazaar seemed illuminated by them. Conversations faded. Merchants stepped aside. Even the station officials straightened their posture as a group of formally dressed delegates entered the square. They wore dark uniforms marked with silver insignias. None carried weapons. None raised their voices. Yet their presence commanded attention all the same. Ethan remained beside Lyra. He noticed her breathing slow and steady, as if she had finally stopped running from something she had been avoiding for years. The lead delegate was an older woman with silver hair and deep blue skin similar to Lyra's. Her expression remained composed until her eyes landed on the young woman standing beside the pillar. Then everything changed. She stopped walking. The entire delegation stopped with her. For a moment, nobody spoke. The station itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the older woman stepped forward. Lyra. The single word carried more emotion than 100 speeches. Lyra stared back. Hello, Aunt Celine. Ethan glanced between them. Aunt. The revelation explained everything and nothing at the same time. Celine's eyes moved briefly to the chain attached to the ground, then to the sign still standing beside it. Her jaw tightened. Not with anger. With regret. We searched for you, she said quietly. Lyra looked toward the sign. Not very hard. Celine accepted the criticism without argument. No, she admitted. Not hard enough. Silence followed. The kind that could only exist between people carrying years of unfinished conversations. Eventually, Celine stepped closer. The people responsible for this have already been removed from positions of authority. Lyra said nothing. The financial records you uncovered were real. Celine continued. The corruption was real. The cover-up was real. And what happened to you should never have happened. Ethan watched Lyra carefully. He expected relief, vindication, satisfaction. Instead, he saw something else. Exhaustion. The kind that arrived after carrying pain for too long. Why are you here now? Lyra asked. Celine's gaze softened. Because somebody finally forced us to see what we refused to look at. Her eyes shifted toward Ethan. Every member of the delegation followed her gaze. Ethan suddenly felt very aware of his worn jacket and scuffed boots. Celine approached him. You are Ethan Carter. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. You stopped. Ethan shrugged slightly. Seemed like the right thing to do. Several delegates exchanged glances. One of them actually smiled. Celine looked back toward Lyra. You know what happened after news of this reached the core systems? Lyra shook her head. Celine gestured toward the sign. Billions of people saw that image. Her voice grew quieter. Nobody asked why a member of House Voss was there. They asked why nobody stopped. The words settled across the square. Ethan looked around. The chain. The sign. The pillar. For 6 days they had been invisible because everyone had accepted them. Then one person questioned them. Sometimes that was enough. Lyra slowly knelt beside the restraint connected to her wrist. The delegates watched silently. Station workers watched silently. Even the merchants remained quiet. For a long moment, she simply stared at the metal. Then she reached down and released the locking mechanism herself. The chain fell away with a soft metallic sound. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. Somehow that made the moment feel more important. Lyra stood, free not because someone had rescued her, but because she finally no longer belonged where others had placed her. She picked up the sign from the pavement, looked at it once, then handed it to a recycling drone passing nearby. The machine accepted it and continued on its route. Just another piece of discarded metal. Nothing more. Dawn was beginning to brighten the station skylights when Lyra turned toward Ethan. The first sunlight reflected in her violet eyes. Thank you, she said. Ethan smiled. For what? Lyra looked toward the waking station around them. Thousands of strangers. Endless noise. Another ordinary day beginning. Then she looked back at him. For seeing a person when everyone else saw a problem. Ethan never found the perfect reply. Years later, when people asked how a forgotten engineer became friends with one of the most respected leaders in the sector, he usually gave the same answer. He had simply stopped walking. And sometimes, in a galaxy obsessed with power, that was enough.